Captain Hannah sat in her quarters aboard the starship Iron Will, staring at the holographic message that floated above her desk. The golden seal of the Galactic Council spun slowly, casting light across her weathered face. She had read the invitation 3 times already, but each time she found something new to smile about. "Formal attire required," she read aloud, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "No military armor or weapons permitted." The door chimed, and Lieutenant Minho stepped inside. His engineering uniform was stained with grease, and he looked tired. "From working on the ship's engines all night?" "Captain, you wanted to see me?" Hannah gestured to the floating message. "Read this." Minho leaned forward, his eyes scanning the diplomatic text. The invitation was written in the flowery language that aliens love to use. It talked about peace, understanding, and the future of galactic relations. But buried in the middle was the dress code. "They want you to attend some fancy dinner?" Minho asked. "The Galactic Diplomatic Summit," Hannah corrected. "Every major species will be there. The Malarians, the Hive Queens, the Crystal Builders, everyone who matters in this part of the galaxy." Minho scratched his head. "And they don't want you wearing armor. That seems suspicious." Hannah laughed, a sound that held no humor. "Oh, it's more than suspicious. It's calculated. They've been trying to figure out how to put humans in our place for months. Ever since we started expanding into their precious territories." The lieutenant nodded. Humans had been making waves in galactic politics lately. Where other species spent decades negotiating for new worlds, humans simply found empty planets and moved in. Where others built careful trade agreements, humans offered better deals and faster shipping. The established powers didn't like being outmaneuvered by newcomers. "So what's the plan, Captain?" Minho asked. Hannah stood up and walked to her personal locker. Inside hung her dress uniform, polished and perfect. But she wasn't looking at the uniform. Her eyes were focused on something else entirely, a small collection of items on the top shelf. Trophies from her younger days when she was just another Marine fighting on the frontier worlds. "They said no armor," she said slowly. "They said no weapons. But they didn't say anything about accessories." Minho followed her gaze and saw what she was looking at. A fang from a razor volf, scales from a flame lizard. Small pieces, but each one had a story. Each one represented a fight for survival that Hannah had won. "Captain," Minho said carefully, "what are you thinking?" Hannah turned back to him, and he saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It was the same look she got before a particularly dangerous mission. The look that said she had an idea, and it was either brilliant or completely insane. "I'm thinking," she said, "that it's time to remind them what humans are really like." She called up her personal files on the computer. Pages of contacts scrolled. Past old friends, former soldiers, hunters, and explorers scattered across human space. She stopped at one name. "Tay? Get me a secure line to Cathara Prime," she ordered. While Minho worked at the communications panel, Hannah began making notes. She pulled up star charts, shipping schedules, and hunting permits. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as plans began to form in her mind. The comm panel beeped, and Tay's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than when Hannah had last seen him, with new scars on his cheek and gray in his hair. But his eyes were still sharp and alert. "Hannah," he said with genuine pleasure. "It's been too long. How's the captain's life treating you?" "Can't complain," she replied. "But I need a favor, Tay, a big one." His expression grew serious. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that involves hunting the most dangerous things in known space." Tay was quiet for a moment, then he grinned. "Now you have my attention." Hannah explained about the summit, the dress code, and her growing idea. As she talked, she could see Tay's grin getting wider. "Let me get this straight," he said when she finished. "You want to hunt apex predators from multiple deathworlds and then wear them to a fancy diplomatic dinner. That's the basic idea, yes?" Tay threw back his head and laughed. "Hannah, that's either the craziest thing I've ever heard or the most brilliant. Maybe both. So you'll help? Are you kidding?" "I wouldn't miss this for anything." "But it won't be?" Easy, the kind of creatures you're talking about. They don't go down without a fight. I wouldn't expect them to, Hannah said. That's the point. They spent the next hour discussing logistics. Which worlds to visit, which creatures to hunt, how long it would take. Tay had contacts on several deathworlds, places where normal humans couldn't survive without environmental suits, where the local wildlife could kill a person in dozens of creative ways. After the call ended, Minho looked at his captain with concern. Are you sure about this? Some of those worlds? Even our best Marines have trouble there. Hannah was already pulling up personnel files. Get me Nari and Jinho and send a message to Earth. I need to talk to Yuna. The fashion designer? Why would you need her? Because killing the monsters is only half the job, Hannah said. The other half is making sure everyone knows exactly what they're looking at when I walk into that summit. Minho left to gather the crew, shaking his head. He had served under Hannah for 3 years and he had learned to trust her instincts. But this felt different. This felt personal. In her quarters, Hannah continued making plans. She pulled up files on galactic protocol, studying the dress codes and customs of different species. Most aliens had very specific ideas about what was appropriate formal wear. They liked elegant, peaceful clothing that showed wealth and refinement. They definitely didn't like displays of violence or predation, which was exactly why her plan would work. She opened a new file and began writing. Shopping list, she titled it. Then she started adding items: void stalker fangs, crystal serpent scales, plasma bear claws. Each item came from a creature that most aliens considered mythological nightmares. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. It was from Ambassador Veltar, the Molarian who was organizing the summit. The message was polite but firm, reminding all attendees about the dress code and security requirements. We look forward to seeing humans embrace the peaceful nature of diplomatic discourse, the message concluded. Hannah smiled as she deleted the message. Veltar and his allies thought they were being clever. They believed that by forcing humans to appear civilized, they would somehow diminish human influence at the summit. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. She leaned back in her chair and began planning the hunt of her lifetime. Not for food, not for sport, but for fashion. She was going to attend their summit wearing the remains of creatures that could kill most of their security forces. And when she walked into that room, every alien present would understand exactly what humans were capable of. The invitation had said formal attire required. Hannah intended to give them the most formal outfit they had ever seen. 3 days later, the Iron Will dropped out of hyperspace near Cathara Prime. The planet hung before them like a green and brown jewel, beautiful from a distance but deadly up close. This was where Tay had made his home after leaving the Marines. Hunting the creatures that other people only had nightmares about, Hannah stood on the bridge watching the planet grow larger on the main screen. Beside her, Lieutenant Nari checked her weapons for the 3rd time in an hour. The young woman had volunteered for this mission without hesitation, but Hannah could see the nervousness in her movements. Relax, Hannah said quietly. We're not going in unprepared. I know, Captain. It's just the things we're planning to hunt. They're not normal predators. Hannah nodded. She had been reading about their targets during the journey. Void stalkers were pack hunters that could turn invisible and move through solid matter. Plasma bears were the size of small vehicles and their fur was radioactive. Crystal serpents could grow up to 50 feet long, and their scales could cut through steel. Any one of these creatures could kill an entire squad of soldiers. Captain, called Jinho from the pilot's seat. Tay's base is coming up on sensors. He's cleared us for landing. The ship descended through Kithara's atmosphere, past floating islands held up by natural magnetic fields and through clouds that sparked with electrical storms. Hannah watched the landscape below change from peaceful forest to twisted badlands, where nothing grew in straight lines. Tay's base was built into the side of a mountain, with heavy walls and automated defenses. As they landed on his private platform, Hannah could see weapon turrets tracking their ship. Even here in his own home, Tay took no chances. The man himself was waiting for them at the airlock. along with two other people Hannah didn't recognize. Tay looked the same as always, confident, alert, and carrying enough weapons to outfit a small army. "Welcome to paradise," he said with a grin as Hannah stepped off the ship. "I hope you brought your appetite for danger." Hannah gestured to her crew. "You remember Minho, this is Nari, my weapons specialist, and Junho, our pilot." Tay nodded to each of them, then indicated his companions. "This is Do-Yun, my tracker, and Isial, who knows more about monster biology than anyone else alive." Isial was a small woman with intense eyes and hands stained with chemicals. She looked at Hannah like she was studying a particularly interesting specimen. "You really want to hunt all three species in 1 month?" "That's the plan," Hannah confirmed as Isial shook her head. "Most people spend years preparing to hunt just one of these creatures. You want to take down the 3 most dangerous predators in known space." "Most people aren't trying to make a diplomatic statement," Hannah replied. They moved inside the base, where Tay had prepared a briefing room. The walls were covered with maps, charts, and holographic displays showing the locations of various creatures. In the center of the room was a large table with detailed models of their 3 targets. "Let's start with the Void Stalkers," Tay said, activating a hologram. The creature that appeared looked like a cross between a Volf and a Shadow. Its body seemed to shift and blur even in the projection. "They hunt in packs of 3 to 5. Isial explained. "They can phase through solid matter for short periods, and they can bend light around themselves to become invisible. Their fangs can punch through most armor." Do-Yun pointed to a section of the map. "There's a pack about 2 days from here. They'd been hunting in the Crystal Valleys, taking down mining equipment." "Why there?" Nari asked. "The crystals interfere with their phasing ability," Tay explained. "It's the only place where they're vulnerable. We'll need to get them angry enough to chase us into the valleys." Hannah studied the terrain. The Crystal Valleys were a maze of sharp formations that could cut a person to pieces if they fell. Fighting invisible wolves in a place like that would be challenging, to say the least. "What about the plasma bears?" she asked. The hologram changed to show a massive creature with glowing fur and eyes like small suns. Even the projection seemed to radiate heat. "They're solitary hunters," Isial said. "Highly territorial. The radiation they give off kills most life within 100 meters. We'll need special suits just to get close." "The good news," Do-Yun added, "is that they're not very smart. Once they start charging, they don't stop until they hit something." Minho raised his hand. "How exactly do we kill something that's radioactive?" "Very carefully," Tay replied. "And with really big guns." The third hologram showed the crystal serpent, and even the crew members who had been trying to stay calm took a step back. The creature was enormous, with scales that looked like living jewels and eyes that seemed to see through the projection into their souls. "This is going to be the hard one," Isial admitted. "Crystal serpents are intelligent. They're also nearly indestructible. Those scales can deflect energy weapons, and their hide is too thick for most projectiles." "So how do we hunt them?" Hannah asked. "We don't hunt them," Tay said with a grin. "We challenge them. Crystal serpents are proud creatures. If we can make one angry enough, it'll come after us on our terms." They spent the rest of the day going over plans, equipment, and backup strategies. Hannah learned about tracking techniques that had been developed over decades of hunting on deathworlds. She studied weapon modifications that could punch through scales that were harder than steel. She memorized the behavioral patterns of creatures that most people only heard about in horror stories. As night fell on Cathara, Hannah found herself on the base's observation deck, looking out at the alien landscape. Strange lights moved through the forests below. Some were natural phenomena. Others were the eyes of creatures that hunted in the dark. Junho joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Second thoughts, Captain?" Hannah took the coffee gratefully. "Not about the mission, but I've been thinking about what happens after. After we hunt these things? After the summit? Once we make our statement, there's no going back. The aliens will know exactly what humans are capable of." "Some of them won't like that," Junho nodded slowly. "You think there might be consequences?" I think there are always consequences. The question is whether we're ready for them. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the alien world go about its deadly business. In the distance, something roared, a sound that made the windows vibrate and sent smaller creatures scurrying for cover. "Captain," Juno said finally, "can I ask you something? Why is this so important to you?" "The summit, it's just a diplomatic meeting." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you know what the aliens call us behind closed doors?" "No." "Barbarians, savages, they think we're barely civilized, that we got lucky with our technology. They believe that if they can just contain us, manage us, we'll eventually become like them. Peaceful, predictable." She turned to face him. "But they're wrong. We're not peaceful because we're weak. We're peaceful because we choose to be. And sometimes you have to remind people that peace is a choice, not a default." The next morning, the hunt began in earnest. Tay led them to a weapons cache. That would have impressed a military quartermaster. Energy rifles, projectile weapons, explosives, and armor designed specifically for hunting apex predators as strapped on her gear. She felt the familiar excitement that came before a dangerous mission. But this was different from military operations. This wasn't about destroying an enemy or protecting territory. This was about proving a point. She was going to hunt the most dangerous creatures in known space, and then she was going to wear them to a dinner party, the aliens thought. They understood humans. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first hunt began at dawn on the fourth day. Hannah and her team moved through the crystal valleys on foot, their boots crunching on fragments of mineral formations that had been growing for millions of years. The crystals rose around them like a frozen forest, some clear as glass, others dark as midnight. Tay moved ahead of the group, his scanner sweeping for signs of the Void Stalker pack. The device beeped softly, showing traces of the creature's unique energy signature. Behind him, Doyun marked their path with small beacons so they could find their way out again. "Remember," Isil whispered into their units, "in the crystal zones, they can't phase completely, but they can still bend light around themselves. Watch for shadows that move wrong." Hannah checked her rifle one more time. The weapon had been modified with targeting systems that could track heat signatures and motion patterns. It would help. But she knew that in the end, this would come down to reflexes and experience. A sound echoed through the valley, like wind through broken glass, but wrong somehow. The pack was close. Nari raised her weapon, scanning the crystal formations around them. "Movement, 2:00, she whispered at first. Hannah saw nothing. Then she noticed it, a shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer was moving against the wind. 3 of them, Tay said quietly, coming from different directions. The attack came without warning. One moment the valley was silent, the next it exploded into violence. The first Void Stalker materialized directly in front of Minho, its fangs aimed at his throat. He threw himself sideways, firing his weapon as he fell. The energy bolt passed harmlessly through empty air as the creature phased again. "Spread out!" Honda shouted. "Don't let them surround us!" The pack had clearly done this before. They appeared and disappeared like deadly ghosts, never staying solid long enough for a clear shot. Their fangs gleamed with dark energy and their eyes burned like cold stars. Junho screamed as claws raked across his shoulder. He spun and fired, but again hit nothing. The creature had already vanished. "The crystals!" Isiel yelled. "Drive them." "Into the crystals," Hannah understood immediately. She began moving toward the largest crystal formation, firing her weapon not at the creatures, but at the spaces between them. The Void Stalkers were forced to dodge, to move in specific directions. One of them materialized too close to a dark crystal and stumbled as its phasing ability faltered. Nari's shot took it in the chest, and it collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. The other 2 became more cautious, circling at a distance. But Hannah had been hunting dangerous things for most of her adult life. She knew how predators thought. She deliberately turned her back on one of them, pretending to reload her weapon. The Void Stalker took the bait, materializing behind her with its fangs extended. Hana spun and fired in one smooth motion. The creature's eyes widened in surprise before the energy bolt ended its existence. The last stalker tried to retreat, but Tay was waiting. His shot caught it as it attempted to phase through a crystal wall, and it fell to the valley floor. In the sudden silence, Hana could hear her heart pounding. Her hands were steady as she knelt beside the first creature and carefully extracted two of its longest fangs. The dark energy that had made them so deadly was already fading, but the fangs themselves remained sharp enough to cut through steel. "One down," she said, wrapping the fangs in protective cloth. "Two to go." The second hunt took place on Infernus III, a world where the ground itself was hot enough to melt metal. They found the plasma bear in what had once been a forest now. Nothing but blackened stumps and radioactive ash. The creature was sleeping in a crater it had made, its fur glowing like banked coals. Even from a safe distance, Hana could feel the heat radiating from its body. Their environmental suits were rated for extreme conditions, but she wasn't sure they would be enough. "Remember," Isil's voice crackled through the cum, "plasma bears charge in straight lines. They're too massive to change direction quickly. Use that?" The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. They would wake the bear, anger it, and then lead it into a trap they had prepared in a nearby canyon. The canyon walls would focus the creature's radioactive energy back on itself, hopefully weakening it enough for their weapons to be effective. Hopefully. Tay fired the first shot, a high-energy pulse that struck the bear in the shoulder. The creature's eyes snapped open, glowing like small suns. It rose to its feet slowly, and Hana was amazed at its size. Standing upright, it was nearly 4 meters tall. The bear roared, and the sound was like a nuclear explosion in miniature. Then it charged. Hana had faced charging enemies before, but nothing quite like this. The ground shook with each footstep, and the air itself seemed to burn as the creature approached. She forced herself to stand still until the last possible moment, then dove aside. The bear thundered past her, too committed to its charge to stop. It hit the canyon wall with tremendous force, and chunks of rock rained down around it. "Now!" Hana shouted. All 5 humans opened fire at once. Their weapons had been loaded with specialized ammunition designed to penetrate heavy armor. The rounds struck the bear from multiple angles, and it roared in pain and fury, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned toward them, its fur burning brighter than before. The radiation levels spiked so high that their suits began warning them about exposure limits. "Fall back," Tay ordered. They retreated deeper into the canyon, the bear following. With each step, the creature grew weaker as its own radiation bounced off the canyon walls and was absorbed back into its body. It was a dangerous game. They were also being exposed to those same radiation levels. Finally, the bear stumbled. Hana stepped forward and put 3 rounds directly into its head. The creature collapsed, its fur slowly dimming as its internal fires went out, working quickly before the radiation could cause permanent damage. Hana cut away several of the bear's claws. Even in death, they still glowed with residual energy. "2 down," she said as they retreated to a safe distance. 1 to go. The final hunt was the most challenging. Crystal serpents were not just predators, they were intelligent, cunning, and nearly impossible to kill through conventional means. They had to be outsmarted. The serpent they found on Titan's Edge was an ancient one, nearly 40 meters long. Its scales shifted through the entire spectrum of visible light, creating a hypnotic pattern that could disorient prey. Its eyes were like dark mirrors that seemed to see into a person's soul. "How do we anger something like that?" Nari asked as they observed it from a safe distance. "We challenge its territory," Tay explained. "Crystal serpents are proud. They won't tolerate another predator in their domain." The plan was audacious even by Hana's standards. They were going to pretend to be a rival serpent by using holographic projectors and sound generators. If it worked, the real serpent would come to investigate. If it didn't work, they would probably all die. JUNHO activated the projectors, and suddenly there was a second crystal serpent in the valley, a holographic one that looked almost real. The sound generators produced the low-frequency calls that the creatures used to communicate. The effect was immediate. The real serpent's head snapped up, its eyes blazing with fury. It began moving toward them with surprising speed for something so large. "Here it comes," Hana said, raising her weapon. The serpent attacked the hologram first, passing harmlessly through the image. Its confusion lasted only a moment before it realized the deception. Then it turned toward the humans with intelligence. That was almost human in its coldness. The fight that followed was unlike anything Hana had ever experienced. The serpent was not just strong and fast, it was smart. It used the terrain to its advantage, striking from unexpected angles and retreating when the humans coordinated their attacks. Their weapons barely scratched its scales. Energy weapons reflected harmlessly off its hide. Explosives seemed to have no effect at all. "The eyes," Isil shouted over the cum. "The eyes are vulnerable." It was easier said than done. The serpent kept its head moving constantly, and hitting a target that size required perfect timing and enormous luck. Hana waited for her moment. When the serpent reared up to strike at Tay, she had a clear shot at its left eye. She fired once, putting everything she had into the aim. The shot struck home. The serpent screamed, a sound that shattered crystal formations throughout the valley. It thrashed in pain and rage, its tail lashing out blindly. Half-blinded and furious, the creature made a mistake. It struck at Hana with its head low, and she rolled underneath its jaw. From that position, she had a clear shot at its remaining eye. The second shot ended the fight. The crystal serpent collapsed, its beautiful scales slowly losing their shimmer. Hana carefully collected several of the largest scales, each one still warm to the touch and shifting through different colors as she moved them. As they prepared to leave the valley, Junho began transmitting footage of their hunts back to human space. The recordings showed everything: the invisible wolves, the radioactive bear, the intelligent serpent. Each hunt had been documented and verified by galactic hunting authorities. "Think this will be enough?" Nari asked as they boarded their ship. Hana looked at her collection of trophies: fangs that could cut through armor, claws that glowed with deadly energy, and scales that bent light itself. Each item represented a victory ovi. In her workshop in Seoul, master craftswoman Yuna received the strangest commission request of her 40-year career. She read the message 3 times before she fully believed what Captain Hana was asking her to create. "A formal dress," murmured to herself, "made from the remains of apex predators." Yuna had created clothing for presidents, celebrities, and alien dignitaries. She had worked with materials from across the galaxy, fabrics that changed color with emotion, threads spun from crystallized starlight, and leather from creatures that lived in the depths of gas giants. But she had never been asked to make a ball gown from monster parts. Her assistant, Jiho, looked over her shoulder at the specifications. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Captain Hana doesn't make jokes," Yuna replied. She had made 3 outfits for the captain before, all military dress uniforms that required precision and durability. Hana was a woman who said exactly what she'd meant. The package arrived 2 days later via military courier. Jiho signed for it nervously, treating the sealed container like it might explode. When they opened it in Yuna's secure workshop, both women stepped back in awe. The void stalker fangs were the first items they examined. Each fang was about 15 centimeters long, curved like a saber, and darker than space itself. Even in death, they seemed to absorb light from around them. When Yuna touched one carefully with a probe, it felt cold despite the warm room temperature. "These are real," Jiho whispered. She actually killed void stalkers. The plasma bear claws were. Next, they glowed with a soft inner light, and Yuna's instruments detected trace amounts of radiation. Not enough to be dangerous with proper handling, but enough to remind her that these had come from one of the most feared predators in known space: the crystal. Serpent scales were the most beautiful things Yuna had ever seen. Each scale was about the size of her palm, and they shifted through different colors as she moved them. Under direct light, they sparkled like living jewels. In shadow, they seem to absorb darkness and reflect it back as subtle patterns. How am I supposed to work with these? Jiho asked. Yuna was already making notes, her experienced eye seeing possibilities that others would miss. Very carefully, and with a lot of research. She spent the next week studying each material. The fangs could be shaped and polished, but they needed to maintain their light-absorbing properties. The claws required special handling because of their residual energy, but they could be incorporated as decorative elements. The scales were the most challenging. They needed to be treated in a way that preserved their color-changing abilities while making them suitable for fabric. Yuna contacted specialists across Earth and beyond. Xenobiologists helped her understand the molecular structure of each material. Material scientists showed her how to process them without destroying their unique properties. Fashion historians provided examples of how other cultures had incorporated animal remains into formal wear. The design itself came to her in a dream. She saw a dress that looked elegant and beautiful from a distance but revealed its true nature up close. It would be cut in the traditional Korean style that she had learned from her grandmother, but modified to showcase the alien materials. We'll use the serpent scales as the main fabric, she explained to Jiho as she sketched. They'll create a flowing pattern that moves with the wearer. The fangs will form a collar, decorative but also clearly visible. The claws will be accents along the sleeves and hemline. It sounds beautiful, Jiho said, and terrifying. That's the point. The work began in earnest. Yuna started with the scales, learning how to weave them together in a way that maintained their flexibility while creating a strong fabric. Each scale had to be individually treated with a special coating that preserved its color-changing properties. The process was delicate. Too much heat would damage the scales. Too little would leave them brittle. As she worked, Yuna found herself thinking about the woman who would wear this dress. Captain Hannah was not tall or imposing in the traditional sense, but she had a presence that made people pay attention. This dress would amplify that presence, turning her into something that could not be ignored. The fangs required a different approach. Yuna had to shape them into a collar that would be both striking and wearable. She used traditional metalworking techniques combined with modern tools to create a setting that would hold each fang securely while allowing them to catch and absorb light. Working with the claws was the most challenging part. Their residual energy made them difficult to handle for extended periods. Yuna had to work in short sessions, allowing the materials to rest between modifications. But the results were worth the effort. The claws maintained their soft glow, creating accents that would be visible even in low light. As the dress took shape, Yuna began to understand what Captain Hannah was trying to accomplish. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about making a statement that would be understood across species and cultures. It's a message, she explained to Jiho as they worked on the final details. She's telling everyone who sees her that humans are not to be underestimated. But why this way? Why not just wear armor or carry weapons? Yuna smiled as she made a delicate adjustment to one of the fang settings. Because anyone can wear armor. Anyone can carry weapons. But to hunt the most dangerous creatures in known space and then wear them as jewelry, that requires something else entirely. The final week was spent on details that most people would never notice, but that would make all the difference. The interior of the dress was lined with a material that would protect the wearer from any residual radiation or energy effects. The scales were arranged in patterns that would create the most striking visual effect as the wearer moved. The fangs were positioned to catch and reflect light in a way that would make them impossible to ignore. Yuna also added her own touches, small elements that honored both human and Korean traditions. The cut of the dress followed lines that had been used in formal wear for centuries. The arrangement of decorative elements followed principles of balance and harmony that her grandmother had taught her. When the dress was finally complete, Yuna and Jiho stood back to admire their work. In the workshop lighting, it looked like something from a beautiful dream. The scales shimmered with their own inner light, the fangs created dramatic shadows, and the claws added points of warm glow throughout the design. It's perfect, Jiho said quietly, but Yuna was already thinking about how it would look under different conditions. In bright light, the scales would create a dazzling display of colors. In dim light, the fangs would seem to absorb illumination from around them. The claws would provide a constant soft glow that would be visible from across a room. She packaged the dress carefully, using materials that would protect it during transport while allowing the various elements to maintain their properties. The accompanying documentation included care instructions, safety warnings, and a detailed explanation of what each component was and where it had come from. As the courier took the package away, Yuna felt a mixture of pride and anticipation. She had created something truly unique, a piece of art that was also a weapon, a formal gown that was also a declaration of war. Somewhere in space, Captain Hannah was preparing for a diplomatic summit that would change the balance of galactic politics. And she would be wearing a dress made from the remains of creatures that most beings considered unstoppable. Yuna had been making clothes for important people for decades, but she had never created anything that would have quite this impact. She found herself looking forward to the news. Reports that would inevitably follow the summit. The aliens thought they understood human fashion. They were about to learn that they understood nothing at all. In her workshop, surrounded by bolts of ordinary fabric and conventional materials, Yuna began planning her next project. If this commission went well, she suspected that there would be other humans who wanted to make similar statements. The age of peaceful, predictable diplomatic fashion was about to end, and Yuna intended to be ready for whatever came next. Ambassador Veltar slithered through the corridors of Nexus Prime, stationed with satisfaction oozing from every pore of his Malarian hide. The Galactic Council's most prestigious diplomatic facility was humming with activity as representatives from dozens of species prepared for the summit. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The human delegation had confirmed their attendance, and more importantly, they had agreed to follow the established dress code. No armor, no weapons, just civilized formal wear appropriate for serious diplomatic discourse. Veltar's plan to humble the upstart humans was working perfectly. In his private office, he activated his secure communication system and called the other key members of the council. Queen Crix's insectoid face appeared first, her compound eyes glittering with anticipation. The crystalline form of Ambassador Threx followed, his body refracting light into rainbow patterns. "The humans have taken the bait," Veltar announced with obvious pleasure. "Their Captain Hannah will be attending, and she has agreed to our dress requirements." "Excellent," Crix buzzed, her mandibles clicking together. "Without their intimidating military appearance, they will be forced to rely on actual diplomacy. They will discover that they are not as clever as they believe." Threx's crystalline voice chimed like broken glass. "My intelligence sources confirm that Captain Hannah has been shopping. For appropriate attire? She visited several textile merchants on Earth." Veltar nodded approvingly. The human delegation was clearly scrambling to meet civilized standards. Good. It was time they learned their place in the galactic hierarchy. What none of them knew was that one of their most valuable intelligence assets had been trying to warn them for weeks. Jisoo sat in her small office in the intelligence division, staring at reports that her superiors refused to take seriously. As a human who had chosen to work for alien interests, she was often caught between two worlds. But lately she felt like she was watching a disaster approach in slow motion. "Sir," she said to her Malarian supervisor, "I really think you need to look at these hunting permits." Administrator Glix barely looked up from his own work. "What hunting permits?" "Captain Hannah has been issued permits for Cathara Prime, Infernus 3, and Titan's Edge, all in the last month." Glix's eye stalk swiveled toward her with mild interest. "So the human enjoys recreation. Many species hunt for sport." "Not these species, sir. She's been licensed to hunt void stalkers, plasma bears, and crystal serpents." Now she had his attention. Glix's skin changed to a worried shade of purple. "That's unusual. Why would she hunt such dangerous creatures?" "I don't know, sir." But the permits were all verified through official channels. And according to the reports, she was successful. Glix waved a tentacle dismissively. Impossible. No single individual could hunt all three of those species and survive. Your human sources must be exaggerating. Jisoo pulled up video files on her screen. These are the official hunt verification recordings, sir. They're required by law for any apex predator hunting. The videos showed Captain Hannah and her team facing down creatures that most security forces wouldn't engage even with full military support. The footage was raw and unedited. They could see every moment of the fights, every close call, every impossible victory. Glix watched in silence, his skin cycling through several shades of concern. When the videos ended, he was quiet for a long moment. This could be staged, he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sir, these videos were verified by 3 separate galactic hunting authorities. The genetic samples were authenticated by xenobiology labs. Captain Hannah really did kill these creatures. But why? Glix asked. What possible reason could she have for taking such risks? That was the question that had been keeping Jisoo awake at night. She had reviewed Captain Hannah's service record, her psychological profile, and her personal history. The woman was not reckless. She was not a glory seeker. Everything she did had a purpose. I think, Jisoo said carefully, that she's planning something for the summit. Glix's skin turned a sickly yellow color. What kind of something? I don't know, sir. But she wouldn't hunt apex predators for no reason, and the timing is too convenient to be coincidental. Glix was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the implications. Finally, he activated his communication system and called Ambassador Veltar. Ambassador, he said when the connection opened, we may have a problem with the human delegation. Veltar's expression was annoyed. What kind of problem? Captain Hannah has been hunting apex predators, very dangerous ones. So, many species? Enjoy hunting as recreation. Glix transmitted the video files. Please review these and tell me if you think this is recreation. The silence stretched out as Veltar watched the recordings. Jisoo could see his expression changing from annoyance to concern to something approaching fear. This is disturbing, Veltar admitted. But I fail to see how it affects the summit. She can hardly bring dead monsters to a diplomatic gathering. Sir, Jisoo interjected, with respect, I think that's exactly what she's planning to do. Both aliens turned to look at her. Veltar's eye stalks swiveled independently, a sign of extreme agitation. Explain, he demanded. Humans have a long history of incorporating hunt trophies into formal wear, Jisoo said. Teeth, claws, hide, bones, they've all been used in ceremonial dress for thousands of years. But surely, Glix protested, they wouldn't be so crude as to wear dead animal parts to a diplomatic function. Jisoo looked at him with pity. These aliens had been dealing with humans for years, but they still didn't understand them at all. Double quote, sir, humans are apex predators themselves. They're proud of it. And Captain Hannah isn't just any human. She's one of their most successful military leaders. If she wanted to make a statement about human capabilities, she let the sentence trail off, letting them reach their own conclusions. Veltar was quiet for a long time. Then he called up the dress code requirements that had been sent to all delegations. He read through them carefully, looking for any loopholes or oversights. The code specifically prohibits armor and weapons, he said slowly. It says nothing about ... accessories. Exactly, sir, Veltar made a decision. Contact our fashion expert. I want Glix to analyze human formal wear traditions. Immediately. The call was transferred to Glix, the Malarian who served as the council's expert on various species' cultural practices. Despite sharing a name with Jisoo's supervisor, this Glix was considered one of the galaxy's leading authorities on diplomatic protocol. Ambassador, the fashion expert said when he appeared on screen, how can I assist you? I need you to research human formal wear, specifically their use of animal materials in ceremonial dress. Glix's tentacles waved in a gesture of dismissal. Oh, that's quite simple. Humans do have some primitive traditions involving animal products, but they've largely moved beyond such practices in their modern diplomatic protocols. They understand the importance of appearing civilized in formal settings. Veltar felt a wave of relief. You're certain? Absolutely. I've studied human diplomatic fashion for decades. They may be violent in their military actions, but they respect proper dress codes. Captain Hannah would never risk appearing barbaric at such an important gathering. Jisoo listened to this exchange with growing horror. These aliens were so convinced of their own cultural superiority that they couldn't see what was right in front of them. Sir, she tried to interrupt, I really think you should reconsider. That will be all, Veltar cut her off. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, but our expert has assured us that there's no cause for concern. The communication ended, leaving Jisoo alone in her office with a terrible certainty that disaster was approaching. She pulled up the summit schedule and calculated how much time was left. 5 days. In 5 days, Captain Hannah would walk into the Grand Assembly Hall wearing the remains of creatures that most species considered mythological nightmares. And the assembled aliens would finally understand what humans were really capable of. Jisoo began drafting her resignation letter. She had tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. She didn't want to be anywhere near Nexus Prime when the consequences of their ignorance became apparent. Meanwhile, in his office, Veltar was already planning his victory speech. The humans would be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness, dressed like civilized beings instead of warriors. The established galactic order would be preserved. He had no idea that he was about to become part of the most memorable diplomatic incident in galactic history. And in a few days, when Captain Hannah walked into his carefully planned summit wearing a dress made from the fangs and claws of apex predators, he would finally understand that humans had a very different definition of civilized than he had assumed. The human transport ship Diplomatic Immunity dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus Prime system exactly on schedule. Captain Hannah stood in her quarters, looking at herself in the mirror, and smiled. The dress fit perfectly. From a distance, it looked like an elegant black gown cut in traditional Korean style. The flowing lines were graceful and understated, exactly what might be expected at a formal diplomatic gathering. But up close, in the right light, the true nature of the garment became apparent. The void stalker fangs formed a collar that seemed to absorb light from around it, creating a halo of darkness around her neck. The crystal serpent scales caught and reflected illumination in patterns that shifted with every movement. The plasma bear claws glowed softly along the sleeves and hemline, providing points of warm light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Hannah adjusted one of the fangs slightly and nodded with satisfaction. Yuna had outdone herself. A soft chime indicated that someone was at her door. Come in, she called. Lieutenant Kyung entered, carrying a small device and trying very hard to keep a straight face. As Hannah's aide for diplomatic functions, Kyung had seen her captain in many different situations, but this was definitely a first. Captain, Kyung said, her voice carefully neutral. The dress is remarkable. Thank you. Is the security scan ready? Kyung activated the device and began running it over the dress. The scanner was identical to the ones used at Nexus Prime, designed to detect weapons, armor, and other prohibited items. As expected, it registered nothing dangerous. No weapons detected, Kyung reported. No armor plating. No energy shields. All materials register as organic in origin. Perfect. Kyung deactivated the scanner and looked at her captain with something approaching awe. If I may ask, are you sure about this? Hannah turned to face her aide. Kyung, how long have we been dealing with the Galactic Council? About 3 years, ma'am. And in that time, how have they treated humanity? Kyung considered the question carefully. Like like we're children, ma'am. Or barbarians who got lucky with technology. Exactly. They've been waiting for an opportunity to put us in our place, to remind us that we're newcomers to their established order. Hannah gestured toward the dress. This is me reminding them that there's a reason we're newcomers. We've been busy surviving things that would give them nightmares. The ship's intercom crackled to life. Captain, to the bridge, came Jinho's voice. We're approaching the station. Hannah took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was elegant, dangerous, and completely uncompromising. Perfect. On the bridge, the rest of the human diplomatic team was assembled. Ambassador Dayon, representing the Centauri colonies, was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Ambassador Wujin from the Outer Rim was a veteran of dozens of first-contact situations. Both of them had worked with Hana before and trusted her judgment, but even they seemed nervous. "Captain," Dayon said as Hana entered, "we've received the final protocol briefings from station security. Standard security screenings will be conducted for all delegation members." "Of course they will," Hana replied. "I'd be disappointed if they didn't try every possible way to find something wrong with my outfit." Wujin was studying tactical displays of the station. The Grand Assembly Hall seats over 3,000 beings. Every major species will be represented, plus dozens of minor ones. This is the largest diplomatic gathering in 50 years. "Then we'd better make sure they remember it," Hana said. Nexus Prime grew larger on the main screen as they approached. The station was a massive structure designed to accommodate beings from hundreds of different worlds. Multiple docking bays allowed for ships of various sizes and configurations. The station's neutral status was guaranteed by treaty: no weapons, no military actions, no conflicts. It was the perfect place for what Hana had planned. They docked at Bay 94, reserved for human delegations. As they disembarked, Hana noticed the increased security presence. Mullerian guards, Hive Queen drones, and representatives from a dozen other species watched them carefully. The security checkpoint was exactly what she had expected. Multiple scanning devices, trained operators, and supervisors who clearly hoped to find something wrong. Hana stepped forward with confidence. "Captain Hana," announced the lead scanner operator, a tall insectoid being with multifaceted eyes. "Please step into the scanning chamber." Hana complied, standing perfectly still as beams of energy swept over her body. The dress registered as she had known it would: organic materials, no technology, no weapons. The scanners detected high levels of exotic matter, but since it was clearly decorative and posed no threat, they passed it as acceptable. "Cleared for entry," the operator announced, sounding slightly disappointed. As the human delegation moved through the checkpoint, other diplomats began to notice Hana's dress. Most gave it only casual glances, seeing nothing more than formal wear in an unfamiliar style. But a few beings with better knowledge of predator biology looked closer and began to whisper among themselves. Ambassador Taeyun from the Andromedan Collective was waiting for them in the diplomatic quarters. He was an older man with extensive experience in galactic politics, and he had specifically requested to be present when Hana arrived. "Captain," he said with a slight smile, "that is quite possibly the most audacious thing I've ever seen." "Thank you, Ambassador. I take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. "The preliminary sessions have been challenging. Several species have been pushing for restrictions on human expansion, claiming we're too aggressive for civilized space." Hana nodded. She had expected this. "And what's our official position?" "Diplomatic. Protests and carefully worded objections," Taeyun replied. "The usual approach." "Well," Hana said, adjusting her fang collar slightly, "I think tonight we'll try a different approach." Word of the human delegation's arrival spread quickly through the station's diplomatic sectors. Most species paid little attention. Humans were still relatively new to galactic politics, and their representatives were not considered particularly important. But in the intelligence services of several major powers, analysts were beginning to connect disturbing dots. Captain Hana's hunting expedition, her visit to Earth's most exclusive fashion designer, and now her arrival at the summit wearing what appeared to be a very unusual formal gown. The Mullerian intelligence report landed on Ambassador Veltar's desk just 2 hours before the opening ceremony. He read it quickly, his skin color shifting to worried purple as he processed the implications. "Impossible," he muttered, but called up detailed scans of Hana's dress anyway. The images showed exactly what his intelligence operatives had feared. Void stalker fangs, unmistakably genuine. Crystal serpent scales, still shifting colors with residual energy. Plasma bear claws. Glowing with the distinctive radiation signature of their original owner, Captain Hannah was attending the most prestigious diplomatic gathering in decades, wearing the remains of 3 apex predators that most beings considered mythological. Veltar reached for his communication device to call an emergency session, then stopped. What could he do? The dress had passed all security screenings. There were no rules against wearing animal products to diplomatic functions. And the opening ceremony was about to begin. In her quarters, Hannah made final preparations. She reviewed her notes on the attendees, checked the schedule of events, and made sure her dress was perfect. Every scale was in place, every fang properly positioned, every claw glowing with exactly the right intensity. Kyung appeared at her door. "Captain, it's time." Hannah stood and smoothed the dress one final time. The crystal serpent scales rippled with color. The void stalker fangs caught the light and made it disappear, and the plasma bear claws pulsed gently with their inner fire. "Let's go make history," she said. The Grand Assembly Hall was already filling with delegates when the human party arrived. Beings from across the galaxy took their designated seats, creating a tapestry of colors, shapes, and sizes that represented the diversity of civilized space. At the main entrance, Hannah paused for a moment. Beyond those doors were 3,000 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all waiting to see how the upstart humans would conduct themselves in civilized company. She smiled and stepped forward. It was time to show them exactly what humans were capable of. The room was about to go very, very quiet. The Grand Assembly Hall of Nexus Prime was a marvel of engineering and diplomacy. 3,000 seats arranged in perfect tiers, each designed to accommodate the unique physiology of different species. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of sophisticated discourse, while advanced translation systems ensured that every word could be understood by every being present. As Captain Hannah approached the entrance, the hall buzzed with the conversation of hundreds of species. Malarians discussed trade agreements with crystalline beings. Insectoid hive queens exchanged pleasantries with aquatic representatives. The air shimmered with bioluminescent displays, pheromone communications, and the gentle hum of universal translators. Ambassador Veltar stood at the podium, reviewing his opening remarks. He had worked for months to arrange this gathering, and everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The human delegation would be forced to participate as equals among civilized beings, without their intimidating military presence. He glanced toward the entrance as the human party appeared, and his prepared speech died in his throat. Captain Hannah walked into the hall with the confidence of someone who had never doubted their welcome anywhere. From a distance, her dress appeared to be an elegant black gown that flowed gracefully as she moved. But as she walked down the center aisle toward the human delegation's seats, beings began to notice details that made them look twice. The first to react was a delegation of Thangorian hunters, whose species prided itself on tracking dangerous prey across multiple star systems. One of them pointed at Hannah's collar and made a sound that their translator rendered as impossible. The Thangorian's exclamation drew attention from neighboring delegates. A crystalline being leaned forward to get a better look, and its harmonic voice chimed with sudden alarm. The sound carried across the hall like a warning bell. Queen Crix, seated in the section reserved for major powers, focused her compound eyes on the approaching human. Her mandibles began clicking rapidly as she processed what she was seeing. The translation system rendered her sounds as, Those are actual void stalker fangs." The comment rippled through the assembly like a wave. Beings who had been engaged in pleasant conversation suddenly turned to stare at the human delegation. The hall's gentle hum of voices began to fade as more and more delegates focused on Captain Hannah, a Malarian. Xenobiologist in the Scientific Observer section activated his personal scanner and nearly fell out of his seat when he read the results. "The energy signature is correct," he whispered to his colleague. "Those fangs are genuine." Hannah continued walking, seemingly oblivious to the growing attention, but those watching closely could see the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She was exactly where she wanted to be, doing exactly what she had planned, Ambassador. Taeyun, seated in the human section, watched with fascination as the realization spread through the hall. He had seen political theater before, but nothing quite like this. Hannah wasn't just making a statement, she was redefining the entire conversation. The crystal serpent scales caught the hall's lighting and began their hypnotic color display. As Hannah moved, the scales shifted through the entire visible spectrum, creating patterns that most beings had only seen in documentaries about deathworlds. Several delegates with sensitive visual systems had to shield their eyes. "By the Great Web," whispered a spinner diplomat, "those scales are still alive with energy." The whisper was picked up by the translation system and broadcast clearly across the hall. Now everyone knew what they were looking at, and the implications began to sink in. Hannah had hunted a crystal serpent successfully. Alone, the plasma bear claws were next to be identified. Their soft glow was distinctive to anyone who had studied exotic radiation signatures. A Geiger counter in the scientific section began clicking softly, detecting the trace emissions that confirmed their authenticity. Ambassador Veltar finally found his voice. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications," he began, but his words sounded hollow in the increasingly quiet hall. More delegates were standing now, trying to get a better look at the human captain. Some were horrified, others fascinated, but all were paying attention. The casual conversations that had filled the hall minutes earlier were completely forgotten. A young Malarian in the junior diplomatic corps turned to his supervisor. "Sir, what does this mean?" The older diplomat's skin had turned a sickly shade of yellow. "It means," he said slowly, "that we have badly underestimated the humans." Hannah reached her designated seat and turned to face the assembly. For the first time since entering the hall, she stood perfectly still, allowing everyone present to get a clear look at her dress and what it represented. The silence was now almost complete. 3,000 beings from across the galaxy, many of whom had never agreed on anything, were united in their stunned recognition of what they were seeing. Queen Crix was the first to fully grasp the implications. Her hive-mind nature allowed her to process information faster than most individual beings, and she had access to detailed biological databases through her networked consciousness. "She killed them all," Queen Crix announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. "Void stalkers, crystal serpents, and plasma bears. She hunted and killed apex predators from 3 different death worlds." The statement hit the assembly like a physical blow. Beings who had spent their entire lives avoiding even the mention of such creatures were faced with a human who had turned them into fashion accessories. A Centaurian delegate, known for his species' pacifist philosophy, stood shakily. But those creatures are myths? Stories told to frighten children." "No," said a gruff voice from the military observer section. Commander Zeth of the Galactic Defense Force had fought in conflicts across known space, and he recognized the signature energy patterns. "They're real." "And she killed them." The hall erupted in whispered conversations as delegates tried to process what they were seeing. Some species began emergency consultations with their home governments. Others started revising their assessment of human military capabilities. A few simply stared in shocked silence. Hannah remained standing, allowing them time to fully understand. The dress continued its slow display of colors and energies, each element telling its own story of victory over impossible odds. "Ambassador," Veltar attempted to regain control of the situation, "if we could please return to our scheduled agenda." "No." The single word came from Captain Hannah, spoken quietly but carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. Every being present turned to look at her. "I think," Hannah said, her voice calm and conversational, "that we need to have a different conversation." She gestured to her dress, the motion causing the scales to shift through a new pattern of colors. "You invited humanity to this summit with specific requirements? No armor, no weapons, just civilized formal wear?" The hall was so quiet that the soft clicking of Geiger counters could be heard. "This is formal wear," Hannah continued. "And it tells you everything you need to know about my people." Ambassador Dayon, seated nearby, watched with professional admiration as Hannah controlled the room without raising her voice or making any threatening gestures. She was simply standing there, wearing a dress, and she had the attention of every being present. "We hunt the things that hunt you," Hannah said. "We survive on worlds that would kill your strongest warriors. And we turn the remains of your nightmares into something beautiful." Queen Crix's mandibles clicked nervously. "What do you want?" Hannah smiled, and the expression was neither cruel nor kind. It was simply confident. "I want you to remember this moment. The next time someone suggests that humans need to be contained or managed or taught their place, I want you to remember what I'm wearing." The silence stretched out as 3,000 beings contemplated the implications. The human standing before them had personally killed creatures that their best military forces avoided. She had done it. Not for survival, not for defense, but to make a point, and the point was unmistakably clear. Finally, Veltar found his voice. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should discuss the human territorial expansion proposals in more detail." Hannah's smile widened slightly. "I think that would be wise." As she took her seat, the dress settled around her like a declaration of independence. The hall remained unusually quiet as delegates began to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humanity. The summit was about to take a very different direction than anyone had planned, except, of course, for Captain Hannah. The remainder of the opening ceremony passed in a blur of nervous glances and hastily revised speeches. Ambassador Veltar stumbled through his prepared remarks while constantly looking toward the human delegation. Every time Captain Hannah moved, even slightly, the crystal serpent scales caught the light and reminded everyone exactly what they were looking at. Queen Crix, who had planned to give a speech about the importance of peaceful expansion policies, instead found herself discussing mutual respect for territorial boundaries. The crystalline Ambassador Threx spoke at length about appreciating the unique capabilities of all species. By the time the formal session ended, the balance of galactic politics had shifted without a single vote being cast. During the first recess, Hannah found herself surrounded by delegates who had suddenly discovered urgent reasons to speak with the human representatives. The conversations were polite, respectful, and very different from the patronizing tone that humans had grown accustomed to hearing. "Captain Hannah," said Representative Vorthek of the Mining Consortium, "my superiors have asked me to discuss some territorial disputes we've been having near the Kepler sector." "Oh," Hannah replied, adjusting one of her Voidstalker fangs. "What kind of disputes?" "Pirates, mostly. Creatures from the void who attack our convoys. We were wondering if humanity might have any expertise in dealing with such problems." Hannah smiled. "I'm sure we could work something out." Similar conversations were happening throughout the hall. Species that had barely acknowledged human existence were suddenly very interested in partnership agreements, mutual defense pacts, and trade negotiations. Ambassador Dayon approached with a datapad full of meeting requests. "Captain, we have 17 different delegations asking for private sessions. The Andromedan Collective wants to discuss joint hunting expeditions. The Trade Federation is offering exclusive mining rights to 3 systems. And the Crystal Builders are asking if we'd be interested in clearing some dangerous wildlife from their new colonies." "Schedule them all," Hannah said. "But make sure everyone understands that these discussions are strictly voluntary. We're not threatening anyone." "Of course not," Dan agreed. "You're just standing there in that dress." When the formal sessions resumed, the entire tone of the summit had changed. Proposals that had been designed to limit human expansion were quietly withdrawn. New motions were introduced that gave humanity favorable trading status, territorial rights, and resource allocation. Ambassador Veltar called for a vote on the human request for exclusive development rights to the frontier zones, territories that had been considered too dangerous for civilized species to colonize. The motion passed. Unanimously, Queen Crix requested a private meeting during the evening recess. Hannah found the Hive Queen in one of the station's smaller conference rooms, her usual retinue of drones standing at attention nearby. "Captain," Queen Crix began, her mandibles clicking nervously, I wanted to discuss the possibility of collaboration between our species. What kind of collaboration? My people have extensive databases on dangerous creatures throughout the galaxy, worlds that we have classified as uninhabitable due to hostile wildlife, perhaps. Perhaps humanity would be interested in clearing these obstacles to colonization. Hannah nodded thoughtfully. In exchange for joint development rights, shared resources, and Queencrix paused, her compound eyes studying Hannah's dress. And mutual protection agreements. Should any species decide that the hive queens have become too powerful, it was a complete reversal of the political situation. Previously, the hive queens had been among the voices calling for human containment. Now they were asking for human protection. The evening concluded with a formal dinner where Hannah found herself seated at the head table, directly next to Ambassador Veltar. The Molarin had been very quiet since the afternoon sessions, his skin cycling through various shades of nervous purple. "Captain," he said finally, "I believe we may have UNICAT ... humanity's role in galactic affairs." "How so?" Hannah asked, cutting into her meal with movements that made the plasma bear claws glow slightly brighter. "We may have underestimated your people's capabilities, your ... unique perspectives on problem solving," Hannah smiled. "It happens. But I think we understand each other better now," Veltar nodded rapidly. "Yes, much better. In fact, the Council has been discussing the possibility of offering humanity permanent seats on several important committees. Trade regulation, territorial disputes, defense coordination. That's very generous. We believe it would be mutually beneficial." As the dinner progressed, other species made similar overtures. The fear that had initially gripped the assembly was slowly transforming into a different kind of respect. They had seen that humans were dangerous, but they had also seen that humans could be reasoned with, negotiated with, and potentially allied with. The key was treating them as equals rather than newcomers to be managed. Late that evening, Hannah stood in her quarters, carefully removing Yuna's masterpiece. Each element of the dress had served its purpose perfectly. The Void Stalker Fangs had demonstrated that humans could hunt the galaxy's apex predators. The Crystal Serpent Scales had shown that humans could defeat intelligent, cunning opponents. The Plasma Bear Claws had proven that humans were willing to face dangers that other species avoided entirely. Lieutenant Kyung helped her package the dress carefully. "Captain, what happens now?" "Now," Hannah said, "we go home. And we start getting ready for all the new responsibilities we've just been given." "Do you think the other species will keep their agreements?" Hannah considered the question. "Some will. Others might try to go back to treating us like barbarians once they're not looking directly at what I was wearing tonight. And if they do?" Hannah smiled. "Then I'll have to come back. And next time I might wear something even more impressive." The thought of what Captain Hannah might hunt for her next diplomatic outfit was enough to ensure that most species would honor their agreements. The final day of the summit was largely ceremonial. Treaties were signed, agreements were formalized, and humanity's status in galactic politics was officially elevated to that of a major power. The human delegation received exclusive hunting and development rights to 2 entire star systems that had been considered too dangerous for civilization. As the diplomatic immunity prepared to depart Nexus Prime, Hannah received a priority message from Earth. It was from Yuna. And it was very brief. "I have 47 requests for similar commissions. When do you want to start the next hunting expedition?" Hannah laughed and began composing her reply. The message was even briefer. "Schedule a planning meeting and start researching the most dangerous creatures in the Andromeda Galaxy."